Welcome to my channel, where we share stories of the most ridiculous HOA situations. Today we have an HOA Karen story that is so good it could be made into a movie. This story comes from a retired U.S. Navy officer. It all started when my HOA, which I did not belong to by the way, tried to change my locks. So it was 7:30 in the morning, and I hear a knock at the door. I open up my front door and there is this lady standing there. She identifies herself as the president of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. And if you're rethinking what does a woman wearing a bathrobe and curlers have to do with a homeownership association, well then you rethinking the same thing that I was thinking, which was why are you at my door in a bathrobe and curlers? But she explained that she has a master key to our homes, and she wants to come in, change my locks, because apparently I was violating some sort of rule. Now I will admit I had a rose bush that had grown over the sidewalk, but I trimmed it back before. I've been meaning to get rid of it entirely, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal, and evidently she thought it was a big enough issue to call the cops. Now here's where the story takes a turn. That woman was the self-declared president of Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association, and I was not a member of the association. But she also just so happened to be using my son's police radio to make the call. See, my son Jake was the city's emergency dispatcher, and he was off duty and sleeping in his room at the time. Little did she know that when she used the radio to call for service, she was talking to my boy. I mean, how crazy is that? He answered the call, and he didn't even realize it was his mom until after he dispatched officers to our house. Once he realized it was her, he tried to tell the officers on the line that it was a domestic issue and they should hold off. But she kept insisting that I had done something wrong and that the cops needed to come and change my locks, so they ended up coming anyway. When they got to the house, they told me that they were there to change my locks, because the woman claimed that I had violated some sort of HOA rule about vegetation heights near the sidewalk. Told them that first of all I was even in an HOA, and therefore I didn't have to abide by any of their silly rules. Second, my rose bush was hardly a violation. Third, they didn't have a key. And fourth, even if they did, they weren't going to get in because I was armed. They ended up leaving without doing anything, which I don't blame them. I do know what they would have done if I was a crazy guy and decided to press the issue. But I wasn't going down without a fight. After they left, I went to go check on my son, who was now awake and wondering what the hell was going on. I talked to him and found out about the whole situation with the HOA Karen. Now, if you're thinking, well, why doesn't this guy just leave and move somewhere else? Let me clarify. I was retiring from the Navy soon, and I had lived in that house for 28 years. It was my home. And besides, this Karen had overstepped her authority, and I was going to make sure that she knew it. So I talked to my son about getting me the dispatch log for that day, so I could get the name of the officer that showed up. And once I had that information, I called the department and asked to speak to the Internal Affairs Division. I explained the situation to them, and they were very helpful. They sent me copies of the dispatch logs, which showed exactly what my son had said to the officers, and what the Karen had said to the officers. They also provided me with the names of the two officers who had responded. Now, I didn't complain about my son answering the call, but I did ask for them to remind him to not take personal calls on department time and radios. I also complained about the officers who took the call, because they acted on the word of a woman, who was uneven authorized to call them in the first place. To their credit, the department agreed and reprimanded the officers accordingly. But that was just the beginning. You see, the woman who called the cops on me was Margaret Henderson, and she was the self-proclaimed president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. She was also the treasurer and the chair of the Architectural Review Board and the Landscaping Committee. All positions that she held solely because she claimed that she was elected HOA president, which she was not. She had somehow convinced everyone else in the neighborhood that she was the president, and that she had the authority to do whatever she wanted. So after speaking with the police department, I decided to dig a little deeper. I talked to my neighbors, and they were shocked to hear that I was unpart of the HOA apparently. Margaret had been going around telling everyone that I was delinquent on my dues, and that I had voted against the HOA in some sort of election years ago, and that I had refused to pay my dues since then. None of that was true. Had never voted against the HOA because I wasn't even a member. And I definitely wasn't delinquent on my dues because I wasn't a member. But still, nobody seemed to believe me. That's when I decided to get my attorney involved. He helped me obtain copies of the association's bylaws and articles of incorporation, as well as minutes from meetings, financial statements, and more. What I found was shocking. First of all, the documents revealed that Margaret was never elected president. There was no record of any election ever being held. And second, the documents showed that Margaret was funneling money from the HOA to her own sham company, Master Key Services, at a rate of over $60,000 a year. I immediately filed a complaint with the state's Attorney General Office and the State Corporation Commission. I also filed a lawsuit against Margaret and the HOA for defamation, trespass, and civil conspiracy. Once the state agencies got involved, things really started to unravel for Margaret. The Attorney General sent her a cease and desist letter, and the Corporation Commission revoked the HOA's corporate status. As for my lawsuit, it caused Margaret to start losing her mind. She became increasingly erratic and began sending me threatening emails and text messages. She even hired a private investigator to follow me and my son, but I wasn't intimidated. In fact, I welcomed it. Finally, it was time for the showdown. I had gathered so much evidence against Margaret that there was no doubt that she was a fraud. So I called a meeting at the community center and invited everyone in the neighborhood to come and see the evidence for themselves. I also invited the local police and the media. On the day of the meeting, I stood in front of the community center with a stack of documents in my hand and announced to the crowd that this was the proof that Margaret was a liar and a thief. I then proceeded to read the most damning parts of the documents aloud for everyone to hear. As I spoke, Margaret's face turned pale and she began to shake. She tried to interrupt me, but I wouldn't let her. I continued reading until I was finished. Then I handed the documents to the police, and they arrested Margaret on the spot. As they led her away in handcuffs, I could hear the crowd murmuring in shock and disbelief. Some people even gasped. No one had ever seen anything like this before. In the end, Margaret was charged with third-degree theft, which is a felony, and several counts of misdemeanor theft for each of the individual violations. She was also charged with filing a false police report. The state attorney's office dropped the charges against her after she agreed to pay restitution to the HOA in the amount of $60,000, which was the amount of money that she had stolen from them. Plus, she had to pay her own legal fees. She was sentenced to 5 years probation, and she can never again serve as an officer or director of any homeowners association. As for me, I continued living in my home until I retired from the Navy. Now that I'm retired, I spend my time traveling with my wife and enjoying my freedom from the HOA and from Margaret Henderson, the HOA Karen who tried to take me down. If you enjoyed this story, stay tuned for more just like it.